There's always one person in the room who just doesn't say much. Not because they're uncomfortable, not really because they're shy, they're just watching, absorbing everything while everyone else rushes to fill the silence. And they're doing something the rest of the room isn't. They're actually processing it. Most people get this completely wrong. We live in a world that basically treats noise like proof of intelligence. Talk the most in a meeting? You're confident. Always got an answer ready? Smart. But there's a whole other kind of mind that doesn't operate like that. And honestly, it goes unnoticed for exactly that reason. If people have called you quiet, reserved, hard to read, this is going to explain something about you that most people never even think to look for. Here's the first thing to actually understand about quiet people. They're not quiet because they've got nothing to say. They're quiet because they're picking up on something most people completely tune out. The gap between what's being said and what's actually going on. When someone's talking, a quiet person isn't just hearing the words, they're reading the energy underneath them. They're clocking the contradiction between what someone says and how their voice shifts when they say it. They're noticing who isn't talking and why. That's not passive, that's exhaustingly active actually. There's a term psychologists use, depth of cognition. Basically, the tendency to process information more thoroughly before responding. And people who do this tend to score higher on analytical thinking, pattern recognition, emotional intelligence. The whole package, it just doesn't look like anything from the outside. From the outside, it looks like hesitation, like someone who's slow, like they don't have a quick comeback. And in a culture that rewards speed above almost everything else, that gets read as a lack of confidence, or worse, a lack of intelligence. The reality is almost the exact opposite. There's a specific experience that quiet people know really well, like viscerally well. You're mid-conversation, you have something to say, something actually worth saying. But before the words come out, your brain runs it through this internal filter. You check it from a few angles. You think about how it might land, you consider whether it's even accurate, and by the time you've done all of that, the conversation's already moved on, so you say nothing. And from the outside, looks like you had nothing to contribute, but internally you processed more in those 5 seconds than most people did in the whole exchange. That's not a flaw. But it is a tension quiet people carry because the world isn't built to wait for them. And there's usually a reason this pattern exists. It traces back a lot of the time to something early. A lot of quiet people figured out, maybe young, maybe slowly over time, that words carry real weight. That saying the wrong thing has a cost, that it's better to actually understand something before you open your mouth about it. That's not overthinking, that's precision. It's a mind that trained itself to be careful, and careful takes longer than careless. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Most people figure quietness is just introversion, a personality thing, wiring you're born with. And sure, temperament plays into it, but that's not really the whole picture. A lot of quiet intelligence has almost nothing to do with personality. It's about how someone handles uncertainty. Highly intelligent people, and I mean the kind of intelligence that doesn't show up clean on a test, the kind that involves nuance and reading between lines, they tend to be genuinely uncomfortable with oversimplification. They notice when a situation is messier than how it's being presented. They can't easily just reduce it down to something tidy. And talking, especially in fast-paced social situations, often demands exactly that. Quick takes, simplified answers, confident-sounding statements made before you actually have enough information to be confident. Quiet people struggle with that. Not because they're unsure of themselves, but because they're too aware of what they don't know yet. That's not insecurity, that's intellectual honesty, and it's actually one of the clearest markers of genuinely sophisticated thinking. David Dunning, the Dunning-Kruger guy, found that the more someone actually knows about something, the more conscious they become of the edges of that knowledge. Confidence and competence don't always grow together. Sometimes they pull apart. The quietest person in the room is often the one who understands that most deeply. Quiet people tend to have rich inner lives, and I don't mean that in a poetic way, it's just observable. When you're not externalizing everything, when you're not narrating your experience out loud constantly, that energy doesn't disappear. It goes inward. It becomes reflection, pattern recognition, this slow building internal archive of observations that just keeps growing. And here's where another layer shows up. A lot of quiet people are exceptional at reading other people, sometimes better than those people understand themselves. They've spent years watching, noticing how someone's whole energy shifts when a certain topic comes up, noticing the gap between what people say they want and what they actually chase, noticing who someone becomes under pressure versus who they perform as normally. That's social intelligence, just the kind that doesn't announce itself. And because it doesn't perform, it doesn't get credited as intelligence. The person who says the sharp, witty thing out loud gets called clever. The person who clocked it 10 minutes earlier and said nothing goes completely unnoticed. This is a big reason quiet people get underestimated so consistently. Their intelligence shows up in ways that aren't always visible in the moment. There's one more layer here that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. For a lot of quiet, thoughtful people, The quietness stops being just a cognitive thing over time. It becomes identity. And with that comes this specific kind of loneliness, not from being disconnected, but from feeling chronically unseen. When the world keeps handing the mic to whoever's loudest, when your depth keeps getting passed over for someone else's volume, something starts to quietly shift. You start wondering if you're missing something, if there's something off about how you're built. There isn't. The mind that sits with complexity, that processes deeply, that listens more than it speaks, that mind is doing something genuinely valuable. It just doesn't always look valuable in real time. And a lot of the people throughout history who changed how we understand the world were described by people around them as hard to read, reserved, unexpectedly deep. Not because they were performing mystery, but because their intelligence was doing its work somewhere most people never thought to look. Quietness was never an absence. It was always something most people just didn't slow down enough to catch. The person who speaks last, who watches carefully, who takes their time, they're not behind. They're building a picture of the world that's layered in ways the noise around them doesn't account for. Once you actually see that pattern, silence reads differently. Not empty, dense. And if something in this landed for you, that recognition alone is worth sitting with. It was never random. It was always a pattern. If this felt accurate, there's more to explore. The next video goes even deeper.